The evolution of the storyline of the war in Ukraine has truly been something to behold over the years, as we have seen that the invasion of Russia into this landmass was something that was completely and totally predictable. But alas, of course, as we know, the corporate media and the press loves to run with the standards that this was an unprovoked invasion. That does not mean the fact of Vladimir Putin having reasoning behind what he is doing, giving him justification for the tyranny he has wrought upon Ukraine. But what we have to understand is the ramifications of what will come down the stream from these escalations over within the Eastern world will only bring us closer towards the precipice of World War III, as we have recently seen with Joe Biden announcing that he has given Ukraine permission to use American-made missiles to fire within Russian territory. And something many people that are actually talking about this within the right-wing media ecosphere are completely missing is the fact is that one reason this very well may have been greenlit is because Russia has finally sent missiles into the most western part of Ukraine. Thus, this very well could have been the tipping point for Ukraine and Zelensky's government, as well as Joe Biden and his administration, and people like Antony Blinken, who would love to see this war escalate. That very well may have been justification in their eyes to ramp up the scales of war. And now here we see Biden allows Ukraine to strike Russia with long-range U.S. missiles. With 2 months left in office, the president for the first time authorized the Ukrainian military to use the system known as ATACMS to help defend its forces in the Kursk region of Russia. And with that permission given by the Biden administration as well as Tony Blinken to Ukraine and Zelensky on the fact of using these American missiles to impact deep within the Russian heartland, what we can understand is that this only represents complete and total escalation in this conflict, when by all means we should want to see this drawn to a close so the dying will stop. So we will not be seeing Ukrainian and Russian conscripts thrust into the front lines of battle for people to watch them being slaughtered by drone warfare on social media on a daily basis. There are so many different off-ramps that could have been taken to avoid the degree of escalation that we've hit in the current day, but of course, the corporate press doesn't address any of that. Just like they don't address the nature of what actually represents escalation to someone like Vladimir Putin and Russia itself. Here we see the use of ATACMS missile systems. Well, that's a major red flag, and it was one when we saw these dual-use launcher systems placed in Poland, but now they're being placed deep within Ukraine to fire deep within the heart of Russia. So what we can see is that red flag is most certainly a red line that has officially been crossed, and in doing so, I fear we may only see more and more death. Absolutely and utterly despicable, because as we know, with this permission, they're most certainly going to take advantage of that fact of having the biggest, baddest bully standing behind them, telling them they can take whatever actions it is that they so desire. And I'm not sitting here maligning the desire of the Ukrainian people to want to defend themselves against Russia, which they see as a tyrannical force. Completely and totally reasonable. Just like I'm not here to malign the Russian people for seeing something like NATO as an expansive force that is consistently encroaching upon Russia itself and operating like effectively nothing more than an enemy to Russia and her people. I am in no favor of any of these nation states whatsoever. I am only in favor of seeing the people come to prosperity. And what we see here going on with the devastation that has rocked the populace of this land is nothing more than governments doing government shit, and that is exactly why I despise it as an entity. Here we now see from CNN, Ukraine fires US-made longer-range missiles into Russia. And what are those missiles that we're seeing? Well, as we just spoke of, it's the ATACMS. And if you're wondering what that is, here you go. The MGM-140 Army Tactical Missile System, or ATACMS, is a supersonic tactical ballistic missile designed and manufactured by the U.S. defense company Lang Temco Vought and later Lockheed Martin through acquisitions. It uses solid propellant and is 13 feet, 4 meters long and 24 inches or 610 millimeters in diameter, and the longest range variants can fly up to 190 miles or 300 kilometers if you don't use Freedom units. The missiles can be fired from the tracked M270 Multiple Launch Rocket System, MLRS, and the wheeled M142 High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, the HIMARS. With that newfound capability granted to Ukraine, you would expect them to take advantage of that, and as we see here on our screen from Newsweek, it most certainly provides the example of exactly that. Here we see Ukraine struck Russian command center in Belgorod. For those who are unfamiliar, Belgorod being roughly 100 miles inland into Russian territory. So what this shows is that Ukraine is starting to get more ballsy, and it makes you wonder, how ballsy is it that they'd be willing to get, and why is it that they'd be willing to get even more staunch in this conflict, willing to strike deeper within Russia? Because they have the biggest, baddest bully in that of the United States standing behind them, telling them it's okay if they pick this losing fight. Now we see, jumping into antiwar.com, Ukraine fires US provided ATACMS into Russia in major escalation. On the same day, Putin formally updated Russia's nuclear doctrine in direct response to Biden authorizing long range strikes onto Russian territory. And this is not the first time that Putin has shifted the dynamics of how Russia's nuclear doctrine is to be constructed during this conflict, which should show that Russia is very much with their back against the wall, and what happens when you pin a rabid beast in a corner. You should expect to get bitten. And of course, as we know, those within the DC elite class do not care about this because they are never the ones who are bitten and have to suffer. No, it will simply be the Russian conscripts, the Ukrainian conscripts that are sent into battle, or possibly your loved ones that are sent overseas to put boots on the ground in a conflict in Ukraine or in Russia. And that will be what we see coming if complete and total escalation is to unfold in a conflict like we see going on with Russia and Ukraine, which was completely and totally avoidable, as will be covered by Jeffrey Sachs in just a moment. Getting back into it, here we see Ukraine has fired US provided Army tactical ballistic missiles, ATACMS, into Russia's Bryansk Oblast, marking a major escalation of the conflict that Russia had made clear risks of nuclear war from. The escalation came as Russian President Vladimir Putin has formalized changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine that lowered the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons, a step he took in direct response to President Biden authorizing Ukraine to use ATACMS, which have a range of about 190 miles and strikes deep inside Russia. The Russian Defense Ministry said in a statement that Ukraine fired 6 ATACMS into Bryansk. At 3:25 a.m. this morning, the enemy struck a site on the territory of the Bryansk region with 6 ballistic missiles. According to the confirmed data, US-made ATACMS tactical missiles were used. As a result of an anti-missile battle, 5 missiles were shot down, and 1 was damaged by a crew of S-400 and Panzer missile defense systems, the ministry said, according to the TASS. The ministry said missile debris fell in the territory of a military site, causing a fire, but no damage or casualties were reported. Russian Foreign Sergei Lavrov said that the attack showed that the West seeks escalation, pointing to the fact that Ukraine cannot fire ATACMS without US-provided intelligence. And that is absolutely true. They need our satellite information to properly guide this. So what we see here is we are directly assisting as the West and the United States in striking deep within the Russian heartland. The fact that multiple ATACMS were used last night against Bryansk region signals that they want escalation. You see, it is impossible to use these high-tech missiles without the Americans, and Putin has repeatedly said this, Lavrov said. Moving a little further down, we see Lavrov also said that he hopes Ukraine's Western backers read Russia's new nuclear doctrine, which considers an attack by a non-nuclear armed state that's supported by a nuclear armed power as a joint attack. The doctrine allows the use of nuclear weapons in response to a conventional attack against Russia or Belarus if it is deemed a critical threat to Russia's sovereignty. The nuclear doctrine states that Russia's nuclear deterrence is aimed at a potential adversary, which may encompass individual countries and military alliances, blocs, or unions that regard Russia as a potential enemy and possess nuclear and or other weapons of mass destruction or have substantial combat capabilities of general purpose forces. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, currently the deputy chair of Russia's Security Council, wrote on X that the new nuclear doctrine means Russia can use weapons of mass destruction against Ukraine and NATO. Russia's new nuclear doctrine means NATO missiles will be fired against our country that could be deemed an attack by the bloc of Russia. Russia could retaliate with WMDs against Kiev and key NATO facilities wherever they're located. That means World War III, Medvedev wrote on X in English. The New York Times first reported on Sunday yesterday that President Biden had authorized Ukraine to use ATACMS in strikes on Russian territory, even though U.S. officials acknowledged the escalation wasn't expected to alter the course of the war. So what we can see is this escalation that will not alter the course of Ukraine losing this fight. They will still be fighting a losing battle, but all it will do is whip the Russian military into more of a frenzy and cost the lives of more Ukrainians. That is what is so absolutely despicable about this. And not only that, we see what's going on here with the announcement of this could lead to World War III. Do you know what also could have led to something akin to World War III? When we saw a missile that impacted into Poland during this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, and what happened? President Volodymyr Zelensky came forward and stated that this was a Russian missile, you see. Here we can see Ukraine's Zelensky blames Russian missile for deadly Poland explosion. Here we see from the Hill, Zelensky calls Russian missiles hitting Poland really significant escalation because he's trying to draw NATO fully into the fight against Russia. And what is it that we actually learned in totality when it came to understanding this conflict in whole and having a bird's eye view so we could realize what was going on in this situation? Well, it appears that a Polish expert ended up confirming that the missile that hit the grain facility was actually Ukrainian. So those two Polish citizens that were killed were done so by a Ukrainian missile provided by the West, of course. And in the process, we can see that Zelensky was doing nothing more than using the death of these innocent people as an attempt to propagandize the world into tilting them against Russia so that we could possibly wage an even larger war. But you know who doesn't want a larger war? Who doesn't want to have to suffer through the endless turmoil and conflict that is brought forward from consistent escalation between Russia and Ukraine? The Ukrainian people. Here we can see from Gallup, half of Ukrainians want quick negotiated end to the war, with the EU and the UK favored over the US as negotiators. And why might that be? Well, it's because at every single turn where there was a possible opportunity to take an off-ramp to bring this conflict to a close so cooler heads could possibly prevail and we would not see the flower of Ukrainian youth ground into the dirt and thrown into the dustbin of history, we could have possibly seen this conflict be drawn to a close. But of course, as we know, at every single turn that there was an opportunity to do so, the West, and that of the United States and the neoliberal world empire, did nothing more than spit in the face of Russians attempting to make a deal. And that is what we have to address here. It is specifically on the West to make sure that they can make amenities with Russia in this situation, because it is the consistent encroachment of something like NATO that has brought us to this point. And if you need an example of how this happened, I would love to give you a perfect description from one brilliant man in that of Jeffrey Sachs. And if you are unfamiliar, please go ahead and look into him. He is well worth any time you can invest. He gives an absolutely phenomenal breakdown of what it is that led to the conflict in Ukraine, how we got to this point, and what this very well may mean for the future. He is someone who has been head on his shoulders consistent at all turns when it comes to analyzing this conflict, and because of that, we should be grateful that someone with such a prominent role as him is speaking out about things such as this. So now let's go ahead and throw it into Jeffrey Sachs, and I'll go ahead and call it here. This will be the last you will see of me. Thank you for watching. If you got this far, thumbs up. If you liked it, thumbs down. If you didn't, tell me where I'm wrong in the comment section down below. Stay lovely, stay great, tell someone you love them, and most importantly, my friends, don't let politics destroy and rot your soul, because you are far too valuable to allow yourself to be tainted by the devil's game. Now please go ahead and give a listen to Jeffrey Sachs explaining what it is that happened that has led to the point that we're at that caused Russia to go into Ukraine.
Let me just explain in 2 minutes the Ukraine war. This is not an attack by Putin on Ukraine in the way that we are told every day. This started in 1990. James Baker III, our Secretary of State, said to Mikhail Gorbachev, NATO will not move 1 inch eastward if you agree to German unification. The U.S. then cheated on this, already starting in 1994, when Clinton signed off on a plan to expand NATO all the way to Ukraine. This is when the so-called neocons took power. The expansion of NATO started in 1999 with Poland, Hungary, and Czech Republic. Then the U.S. led the bombing of Serbia in 1999. That was a use of NATO to bomb a European capital, Belgrade, 78 straight days to break the country apart. The Russians didn't like that very much. But even Putin started out pro-European, pro-American, actually asked maybe we should join NATO when there was still the idea of some kind of mutually respectful relationship. 9/11 came, then came Afghanistan, and the Russians said, yeah, we'll support you. We understand to root out terror. In 2002, the United States unilaterally walked out of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. What it did was trigger the U.S. putting in missile systems in Eastern Europe that Russia views as a dire, direct threat to national security by making possible a decapitation strike of missiles that are a few minutes away from Moscow. In 2004-05, we engaged in a soft regime change operation in Ukraine, the so-called First Color Revolution. But in 2009, Yanukovych won the election, and he became president in 2010 on the basis of neutrality for Ukraine. So in February 22nd, 2014, the United States participated actively in the overthrow of Yanukovych. They intercepted a really ugly call between Victoria Nuland and the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Jeffrey Piat, who's a senior State Department official till today. And they talked about regime change. So they made the new government. The U.S. then said, okay, now NATO's really going to enlarge. And Putin kept saying, stop. You promised no NATO enlargement. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, 7 more countries in the not 1 inch eastward. On December 15, 2021, Putin put on the table a draft Russia-U.S. security agreement. The basis of it is no NATO enlargement. The special military operation started, and 5 days later, Zelensky says, okay, neutrality. And then the United States and Britain said, no way, you guys fight on. We got your back. We don't have your front, you're all gonna die, but we got your back. That's 600,000 deaths now of Ukrainians since Boris Johnson flew to Kyiv to tell them to be brave. Absolutely ghastly. We have to understand, we're not dealing with, as we're told every day, with this madman like Hitler. This is complete bogus, fake history that is a purely PR narrative of the U.S. government. We're playing games here. So, God forbid, a nuclear power comes at us. I don't know what's going to happen, but we came at them.